Hello and welcome to this episode of Career Shorts hosted by the Antibody Society, where we talk to a whole host of individuals from various sectors, including industry and academia, to gain their valuable insight and advice into how PhD students and postdocs can navigate the tricky world after their studies and contracts. Now in this episode, we're talking to Dr Jyothsna Visweswaraiah, Associate Director at FL75. Now, these episodes and more are available directly on the Antibody Society or across our social media pages. So we hope you find this a valuable and enjoyable experience, and let's get into it. So, hi Jyothsna, welcome to Career Shorts. Can we start off by you telling us a little bit about yourself?
Yeah, sure. Thank you for having me here, Raquel. My name is Jyothsna Visweswaraiah. I'm currently the Associate Director for Protein Sciences at a flagship pioneering NewCo called FL75. We're based out of Cambridge, Massachusetts. My background is protein engineering and biochemistry, and more recently, I've dabbled with the antibody discovery, engineering, and analytics. So there I've worked specifically with bispecifics and Fc fusion proteins as therapeutics.
Awesome. And so just kind of jumping straight in, when we looking at your LinkedIn profile, it seems that you spent some time after your PhD in academia. You worked as a postdoc and a research fellow before you kind of transitioned into a biotech in kind of industry environment. Would you be able to tell us a little bit about your experience working as a postdoc and why you transitioned into industry?
Yeah, sure. So I did my postdoctoral training at the National Institutes of Health in Maryland in the United States. Actually there I was studying how protein synthesis or the translation initiation is regulated. What I was doing was using a structure-guided approach because the structure of the ribosome had just come out to really look if ribosomes can accurately select correct start sites for translation initiation. At that time, the notion in the field was ribosomes were just sites for translation, that they didn't actively participate in, start codon selection and so on. But these structural insights led me to go after certain ribosomal proteins, and I actually found that these proteins actually actively participate in start codon recognition. So when everything is perfect, the ribosome is more stable, and therefore it can initiate translation. So, basically I was doing a lot of protein purification, engineering the ribosome differently, and so on to test my hypothesis. From there, I moved to Harvard Medical School, where I was trying to figure out the molecular mechanisms of aging, why we age, how we age, can we slow it down? One of the side things I was doing there was actually doing small molecule screens for compounds that would help with increasing certain things that we knew would help with preventing or slowing aging. They were just additives for cosmetics and nutraceuticals. And that was really the stage where I felt like it was like a point where I needed to move on and actually get into industry to help people with the science that I was doing. Then I started talking to people, being in the biotech hub, which is the Boston area. It was very useful and helpful. I met with a lot of my old colleagues who were now in industry, and generally learned about the possibilities. And then I started talking to people, and I ended up at a startup as one of the first scientists there.
That's really, really exciting. So can you expand a bit more on that transition, from a postdoc, the maybe challenges you faced and any advice for people in a similar position that want to transition out? Because I think something interesting that you said about, you were talking to people that you kind of had a little bit of connection or insight into that, and it seems like it was quite helpful.
Yeah, so actually, funnily, the transition was very easy, mostly easy. And I really think I owe it to the team at Pandion Therapeutics and my manager, Nathan, for helping me, kind of steer the waters of biotech in general. I will say one of the things I did find a little interesting, or I had to kind of get used to, was, in a company setting, while you're doing experiments, there are also meetings and other things you need to attend. And it was just being a little aware of it, as postdocs or as PhD students, mostly the whole day is open for doing experiments. You could, you can plan and extend and go on, but that's not the case with companies. There are certain meetings. And also, in academic settings, if there is a meeting, the whole lab is going to it, right? Versus so you never miss a meeting because somebody will tell you, hey, aren't you coming to this? But in a company setting, not everybody is going to all the meetings. So you kind of have to be very aware. So it made me, I think, a better planner and manager of my time. I knew exactly how to fit in my experiments such that it would be an incubation over a certain meeting, or I've already read the readout before I went into the meeting. And I think it really helped me become a more efficient planner and executor of experiments while being at every meeting.
Well, that's great. I've heard from friends or whatnot that in industry it's more like a 9 to 5, quite a strict schedule, rather than in academia. As a PhD student, you can rock in whenever you like. You can stay till late, leave halfway through the day. It seems like it's a lot more structured in industry.
Yes.
Which is good.
It is. And I think that also helps scientists also, because we become more structured in our day. It also helps us, keep that separation, get the rest you need. You can come back really energized the next day, versus I definitely remember, when I was doing my PhD, I'd stay late in the lab, and then I'd go home and I'd be sad the experiment didn't work. I'd mope a little, by the time I went to bed, it was maybe 3 a.m. and, then I couldn't drag myself out to go to the lab. So it's a bit weird, and sometimes we are kind of our own worst enemy in that sense. But having the structured routine kind of helps a little bit with also going away, taking the time off, and coming back re-energized. And sometimes, you come back with better perspective of why something worked or didn't work, and you can try out different things.
Yeah. And at the moment, kind of jumping ahead forward now, you're currently leading kind of the antibody efforts at this new startup, FL75. And as you've mentioned, again, you've spent some time working at Pandion Therapeutics as well. So I guess focusing on the now for the moment, can you tell us a little bit about your role now and kind of what does your day-to-day look like? I know in science and experiments, I don't know if you're more on the experiment side or if you've kind of transitioned more to the office space.
Yeah. So currently, my day-to-day is a lot of thinking in terms of the scientific direction, both in bigger picture, but also getting into the nitty-gritties of the how, the why, and the when, and how, things and the what's even. While I'd like to do more work in the lab, I'm not as much in the lab just because I think no experiment can reliably be done in time with all the other meeting schedules I have. But it's really, I see my role now as to enable my team of scientists to maximize their fullest potential, and helping them out kind of almost expands the horizon so much more bigger, because there are 4 people who can then go on and do so much more by just me helping them out than me trying to do everything in the lab with them.
Yeah, and that kind of answers my next question about your responsibilities, kind of how they've changed, because I saw you kind of almost worked your way up the ladder at Pandion, worked from a scientist, senior scientist, principal scientist, and now you're kicking butt and you're leading a whole group. How has that been, that kind of, I guess, change in perspective of science? How has that changed your perspective of science? And how has that forced your kind of skill development? Because you go from being probably more of a solitary figure during your PhD and postdoc to kind of having to think about not only with the vision, the long-term vision of the project, but mentoring and developing your colleagues.
Yeah, no, that's a great point you make. I think as PhD students, as postdocs, even to some extent as scientists, we are like almost individual contributors. We are going in there with, it's you doing the things, you getting the outcome. But, I think, and this is very much true in industry also, which is you're working as a team. So a lot of it is a team-based, it's almost like a team-based sport. You have to do your bit and then somebody else has to do their bit. So a lot of it depends on how you do it, which will then impact them and therefore the company. So as a scientist, I definitely developed a lot of skills of keeping all the stakeholders informed and proactive communication, which is not necessarily something we do when we're doing our PhDs and postdocs. But then from there on, I think as like you mentioned, moving higher up as senior scientist and principal scientist, co-leading programs and things like that, you start thinking a little bit more about the bigger picture, not just of the protein science aspect of the project, but also a little bit more on the animal models, the immunology. Well, I mean, like I said earlier, there are other people in the team who will actually do the stuff, but you can still, you learn to think about those sorts of things, think about, also in some ways, because you're leading these teams for the project, you kind of start anticipating and foreseeing what is the need, by when do we need to have things ready, and so on. And definitely, I think now leading a team of people, it's not just one project or two projects that I have to think about, but all the different projects. And it's interesting how my perspective has now changed slightly. When you're leading one project or two projects, those two are your only priorities, right? But when you're at the next level where you have it's all the projects, you have a view of everything, then you can start seeing why sometimes when you were leading a project that was not necessarily a priority for the company, or was lower priority when compared to certain other higher priority projects. So yeah, I think it's definitely, the perspective has evolved over time and grown, and I can appreciate all my previous managers, how they've managed to do it.
Yeah, I guess it must also be quite interesting because you get to touch upon lots of different areas of of science, and because you're not just limited to one scope. You kind of see the translation, you get to learn a little bit about the other subjects and see how they interconnect. That's quite interesting. Yeah, and I guess you kind of mentioned earlier that at the start of your PhD postdoc journey, it was mostly focusing on, it was more of the biochemistry, like protein, ribosomes and structural. So it seemed like before Pandion Therapeutics, and again, correct me if I'm wrong, you never worked with antibodies, and now you are. And so I think there's like two things to that. One is just a general notice point, which one I think it's quite cool because it's kind of the versatility of science. You're not, what you start out in your PhD project, it doesn't limit you going forward. And I guess, and the other point or question is, was there anything in particular that drove you to work with antibodies, or was it something that there was a job opportunity, you suddenly got immersed in the world of antibodies and you're like, hold on a minute, this is actually pretty cool, and you kind of stuck with it?
Yeah, so you're right. Before Pandion, I had no prior antibody experience, but I'd like to say antibodies are proteins. And really a lot of things, I know, like a lot of things, I've done previously, like, generating constructs, designing them, expression, purification, engineering, they're all transferable skills, right? Of course, there was some self-learning also involved that was about, learning about the background, antibody background and things like that on my part in general. But in fact, I feel like some or a lot of biotech companies go out to find people. I mean, they're not necessarily stuck with the idea that they need to hire people with the exact same skill sets. In fact, I think I've definitely interviewed at so many places where they and I've said, oh, just FYI, I don't know how to do this. And they've just been like, no, we know that. And that's why we want to talk to you, is because they feel like we can bring a different and a fresher perspective. And you're not limited by preconceived notions of the field, like, oh, that's not a possibility, or nobody's ever done that. Of course, we have to be aware of the situation, right? That you may not know something that is kind of a very regular thing in the field. But I think keeping that in mind, I think, like you said, everything is a possibility.
Yeah.
And so, yeah.
Go on.
No, I was going to say, so, and the antibody part of what drove me to working to antibodies, I think, was just really a lot of my skills were transferable. If you want to try to help with therapies, antibodies were the way to go. So.
And I guess, has there been, like, what's been the most exciting part of, what you do, either as a scientist in general, or working with antibodies in specific? Like, is there something that's kept you hooked in science?
Yeah, I mean, so what's most exciting for me is knowing that everything we do collectively as scientists is moving us in the right direction, whether it's a failed experiment or it's something that worked. We either know that's not the way to go, or this is the way to go. In general, I think the field of antibody is so fast changing, with so many new ideas to achieve the outcomes that we are intending. It's crazy to keep up with everything, and that's really what's kept me hooked on, is the possibilities. Are endless, and it's so enticing. To today you think you know something, and then you can wake up tomorrow and something else new has come up, and it's that quest to constantly learn that's kept me hooked. And the antibody field is definitely keeping me up on my toes.
And have there been any particular challenges that you faced developing your career in this field? Like, and if there were any challenges, how did this experience shape you?
So in terms of, I guess, challenges, we touched briefly a little bit previously about, changing a little bit of the style of how you work. And I think the other thing that I, at the beginning, faced quite a lot of was in company or in the biotech field or the industry, there is a lot of jargon people use that, others who are new, and you have no idea. What I actually learned, or I wish I had told myself back then, was it's okay to ask. Because people aren't doing it intentionally. It's just how they talk. And at the beginning, I remember I was just like, oh my God, I don't want to say I don't know this, because then what are they going to think about me? But I think it would have, I obviously then would go and constantly keep checking what this meant, or what was that terminology, or what things like that. But I wish I had asked people right then and there. And maybe I would have heard, sometimes it took me a long time to actually figure out what it is that they were talking. And it would have been just a lot more easier if I just asked.
Yeah, having the courage to just say you don't know something. Yeah. But it can be quite scary, isn't it? I mean, whether you're a student or whether you're an adult, it feels like there's always that fear of, you don't want to come across as stupid, isn't it? It's like the fear of, you just don't, you want to know. But I think, maybe we shouldn't be afraid of not knowing, because we're human, I guess.
We're not expected to know everything. Yes.
And for someone now kind of transitioning onward to some lovely advice for our students listening, for someone who wants to work in the field of antibody discovery and development, are there any particular experiences, maybe skills that you think are the most valuable for someone who wants to enter something that you've been in for the past several years?
So, I mean, I guess really, I would say the instead of saying what skills or things like that, I'd say the only words of advice I have is get uncomfortable and learn things you don't know, because Obviously nobody can predict what skills will come in handy for you, but as long as you're learning things you don't know, you're learning things, and they may become useful along the way sometime. That's the way I think of it.
Yeah. And are there any particular career missteps, either, or maybe even application missteps perhaps, that that students or early career scientists should avoid, for example?
Yeah, I think, and this, I'm guilty of this too, which is a lot of people think of or don't realize the importance of a network, right? Like people think of networking as, oh, I'll do it when I need to find a job. But a network is not necessarily, I mean, while that can be true and you can find jobs that way, that's not really what, like, that's only one facet or one use of the network, right? The network can be useful for you to think of different ways to do things, newer ways to do something that you didn't know about. And in general, like for you to learn where the field is progressing or how certain things are done at different companies. It's not necessarily just science. It could be culture. You could get new ideas about how to build a team or things like that. So I think networking, not necessarily because you want to find a job, networking because it can be useful on many different levels. And then eventually when you're in the position where you need to hire people, networking also helps to find the people.
Yeah, so kind of enhancing yourself as yourself and the work-wise. And for your networking, I mean, how does LinkedIn, for example, play into it? Or what do you find people interaction is most valuable, or kind of a mixture of the two?
I think it's definitely a mixture of the two, because oftentimes I'd be like, let's say at an event or where I met someone, but you don't have the time to actually sit at length and discuss or talk to them. And then the easiest way to find them would be on LinkedIn. And then you can always kick it off from there as oh, it was great, I met you that day at this meeting. However, we couldn't discuss more. And then you can take that off, would you be interested to talk to me on Zoom, or by coffee, whatever. So I think LinkedIn has played a very big part in not just like the networking, but keeping in connection with them beyond the meeting or the conference. Yeah. And the other way I always network is to go to events. If, like there is a society event, or around the Boston area, there are these other groups. So for example, I volunteer and work very closely with the Women Entrepreneurs in Science and Technology West around here, which puts up a lot of programs and content for women in science and how to help them build their careers. So, these things are very helpful for me, also as someone who's learning how to build and grow in their career.
Well, that's fantastic. And I guess to wrap things up, my final question to you is there anything that you would have told your younger self, or, if there isn't, has there been a moment that's defined where you are today?
I really wish I had told myself to dream bigger. I think, like you said, and we talked about previously, we always are so encompassed by self-doubt and feeling like, oh, I don't know if, the imposter syndrome, it's so common. I really wish, people were, as I grew up, that I could tell myself it's okay not to know everything, but still you can dream big and you can go after it.
And that's all for this interview. Thank you very much for listening, and we hope you found today's session insightful and valuable. If you'd like to hear more interviews like this, then please check out the Antibody Society's website or YouTube channel. Now, membership is free for all students and postdocs, and we have some really great value for money memberships for our industry and academic partners. Please feel free to share this video and come check us out on our LinkedIn, Twitter, and YouTube pages. If you'd like to connect with today's speaker or reach out to us, then please check out some of the details in the description box below. And thank you again for listening.